contributions, even if fully implemented, would still increase emissions by 2030. According to the latest joint analysis of the nationally determined contributions by UNEP and UNFCCC, we remain on a catastrophic temperature rise track well above 2 degrees Celsius. So net zero pledges require rapid, sustained emissions cuts this decade. And I welcome the recognition of this fact in yesterday's US-China cooperation agreement that I consider an important step in the right direction. But promises ring hollow when the fossil fuels industry still receives trillions in subsidies as measured by the IMF, or when countries are still building coal plants, or when carbon is still without a price, distorting markets and investor decisions. Every country, every city, every company, every financial institution must radically, credibly and verifiably reduce their emissions and decarbonize their portfolios starting now. Dear friends, while it's far from enough, we can take stock of progress. Last week, a number of countries committed to working collectively to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. Year 2, we need meaningful concrete action and results in the 2020s. More than 1,000 cities around the world have committed to reach net zero by 2050 or earlier, sometimes far earlier. Our host city, Glasgow, has set a 2030 deadline. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, the gold standard for credible commitments and transparent targets, is managing $10 trillion in assets and catalyzing change across industries. I encourage the much larger Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero to follow the same path. The global coal pipeline has decreased by 76% since 2015. The G20, including the 3 largest public financiers, have committed to ending overseas coal finance. 28 new members joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance, raising the membership to 165 countries, cities, regions and businesses. And 44 countries and 32 companies and regions have committed at COP26 to transition from coal to clean power. And this will be an enormous task. That is why I've been calling for the formation of coalitions of countries, international financial institutions and private finance, as well as renewable energy companies, to support this momentous shift and to organize coalitions in support of specific countries that need to speed their energy transition. Some 30 member states and regional development banks have pledged immediate support for the clean energy transition in countries. And I urge more financial institutions and investors to follow suit. I welcome the partnership that will allow South Africa to rapidly decommission its coal plants while ensuring that workers and communities are not left behind. Indonesia and Vietnam have pledged to phase out coal by 2040. They will need support. And we need similar coalitions to deliver resilient infrastructure and adaptation in countries on the front lines of the climate crisis, from small island developing states to the least developed countries. Friends and colleagues, the announcements here in Glasgow are encouraging, but they are far from enough. The emissions gap remains a devastating threat. The finance and adaptation gap represent a glaring injustice for the developing world. We need even more ambition in future revised nationally determined contributions. And we need pledges to be implemented. We need commitments to turn concrete. We need actions to be verified. And we need to bridge the deep and real credibility gap. As an engineer, I know that durable structures need solid foundations. We must be able to measure progress and to adjust when off track. We have a critical mass of global commitments to net zero from both governments and non-state actors. We must now zoom in on the quality and the implementation of plans, on measuring and analyzing on reporting, transparency and accountability. And that is why, beyond the mechanisms already set out in the Paris Agreement, I've decided to establish a high-level expert group to propose clear standards to measure and analyse net zero commitments from non-state actors. The high-level expert group will build on existing work and submit a series of recommendations to me during the course of next year. And they will work in a transparent and inclusive manner, and I invite you all to cooperate fully in their establishment and then with them. We need action if commitments are to pass the credibility test. We need to hold each other accountable, governments, non-state actors and the civil society. Because only together can we keep 1.5 degrees within reach and the equitable and resilient world we need. And I thank you for your commitment and for your dedication to this that is the most important fight of our lives.
Thank you, Excellency. I now pass the floor to Mrs. Patricia Espinosa, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, dear COP President Alok Sharma. Thank you, Secretary General Guterres. It's really an enormous pleasure for me to be able to sit here in front of all of you with the climate champions, Nigel Topping and Gonzalo Munoz. Thank you. I have really testified how much they have been working over these last 2 years. And it's really incredibly encouraging to see all of you here. I think this is the best attended event on global climate action that we have had since it began after Paris. The same is true of the multiple events that have been taking place in the climate action zone. Dear friends, in the remaining days of COP26, the eyes of the world are focused on Glasgow, watching to see not only if parties make the bold and courageous decisions needed to fully unleash the potential of the Paris Agreement, but whether global leaders across all sectors make the commitments necessary to prove that our transition to a low-emissions future is truly underway. The transition required is beyond the scope, scale, and speed of anything humanity has accomplished in the past. It's a daunting but achievable task. Glasgow can be the starting point of a new, more prosperous era, a greener, more resilient and sustainable future, one that is more just and more prosperous for all people. The transition, however, cannot be driven by governments alone. Inclusive multilateralism brings together party and non-party stakeholders, including cities, subnational regions, businesses, investors, and civil society. And I thank all of you who traveled to be here in Glasgow for your efforts and for having come here. And all of you are driven by a unity of purpose, which is reflected in the achievements of the Marrakesh Partnership and the global campaigns of Race to Resilience, Race to Zero, and the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Yet, they must continue to evolve. That's why I welcome the champion's vision for improvement of the Marrakesh Partnership for the next 5 years. One, showing the clear path ahead to significantly reducing global emissions and scaling up finance. It is vital that the issue of solidarity is included in this discussion. We cannot repeat the mistakes of history, when great transition and change have resulted in people and entire nations falling by the wayside. We know that government and business leaders must work together with non-party stakeholders, including unions, to help provide the policies and programs that will facilitate solidarity with vulnerable communities whose reality keeps getting worse and worse. I do want to end by thanking our climate champions, Gonzalo and Nigel, for their tireless effort and dedication throughout not only this COP, but 2 very, very challenging years. Dear friends, our efforts to address our climate emergency do not end in Glasgow. Where one chapter ends, a new one begins. We will work harder than ever because we must. We have no other choice. I look forward to continue working with all of you to drive the transition to a better, greener, healthier, and more resilient world. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Secretary. I would now like to invite the event moderator, Mrs. Selina Abraham, who will lead us into the second session of the event, moving to the non-party side. Mrs. Abraham, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, COP President, Secretary General, and Executive Secretary for these opening remarks. And allow me to invite you to take your seats on the floor. Welcome, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Global Climate Action Event, Racing to a Better World. Racing to the future that we want, to the future that we deserve, but one that we have not achieved yet. My name is Selina Abraha. I'm the Africa Regional Manager for the Global Landscapes Forum, one of the many NGOs, observers who are here at COP. And while we may have the title of observers, we know that non-state actors are doing so much more than just observing. We're taking action, building alliances, and driving the ambition that is required. So to everyone around the world who doesn't have a seat at the negotiation table, this event is for you. In the next 2 hours, we are going to look at the momentum and the action that's being driven by all facets of society, from young activists to city mayors, so that we can harness this power to move quicker towards our climate goals. But before we dive into this rich discussions ahead and the program that we have for you, I would like us all to take a deep breath. It's been a very long few weeks. I know there's been a lot of work that's been put in, and this is our moment to really take some self-reflection. Thank you, everyone. This is our opportunity to reflect on the progress that we've made to date, to ask ourselves how far have we come and whether we have gone far enough. And to have this conversation, I'm really excited to join the climate champions. Nigel, Gonzalo, allow me to do a quick recap of your work, which has happened over 2 years. You've launched the improved plan for the Marrakesh Partnership. You've also launched the Yearbook for Climate Action. And in this yearbook, I'm going to switch to this mic, yeah. In this yearbook, you include clear plans for the future of your flagship campaigns, the Race to Resilience, the Race to Zero, and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. You made it clear that your intentions are to drive meaningful action at the urgency that's required, given the glaring and terrifying realities that we're facing across mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and the state of finance. You've placed an emphasis on clear accountability and tracking, and to strengthening the capacity of local actors to drive solutions that work for them. So it seems that the race is on. But Gonzalo, can I turn to you first? Since Madrid, we've seen a lot of commitments from cities, from businesses, regions, investors. This COP has made it clear that we must pivot from talk to implementation. So what are your reflections about your nearly 3 years now as UN climate change high-level champion, and how far the non-state climate action agenda has progressed?
Well, first, thank you to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, to the COP26 President Alok Sharma, and of course to the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa for such powerful remarks. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much, Salina, for bringing that perspective, because I think that there's a lot of extra value when we see all of this as a film and not just the single picture of today. What I would like to do now with all of you is to really watch the film of those 3 years that you've been mentioning, because for me, it all started right after Katowice, where we know that there were still some questions about the importance and the relevance of following science. We knew that. And many of us were sharing the same level of frustrations. So the Secretary General in that same year, 2019, called all of us to get aligned under one concrete goal, to keep the 1.5 alive. And that, with the leadership of the UNDP and the UNFCCC and Chile, that's why we launched the Climate Ambition Alliance that particular moment that was somehow the birth of the Race to Zero, putting together, in that case, commitments coming from states and also from non-state actors from all around the world, all of them committed to a net zero 2050 world. And that was one of the key initiatives of the Secretary General 2019 Climate Summit. Let's be honest then around what we really were thinking about the expectations at that moment only a little bit more than 2 years ago. At that time, there were just a bunch of probably 10 companies globally committed to this trajectory, and we were trying at that time to bring another 10. During the summit, we were really proud with working with the UN Global Compact and their initiative, the Business Ambition for 1.5 initiative, of having achieved 97 companies joining this trajectory. So take a look. We've moved from an expectation of another 10 to having reached 97 to having now more than 5,000 companies from all around the world, all sizes, all regions, all sectors of the economy, all of them committed to a net zero 2050 at the very latest. All of them setting... Thank you. Thanks to you. And thank you, Secretary General, for that inspiration. All of them know that it's all about how rigorous their decarbonization targets will be. They are setting rigorous decarbonizations aligned with science-based targets. We went from some 100 cities at your summit, Secretary General, to more than 1,000 cities, as the Secretary General mentioned in his remarks, thanks to the work of ICLEI, C40, and GCOM. The commitments coming from the subnational regions, the states and regions at a local level, were done at that time, and still some of them under the Under 2 coalition. Under 2 meaning under 2 degrees. This week, that coalition has changed the name to be a net zero coalition. That is massive. That coalition represents more than 50% of the global economy. And of course, we have seen now also the financial institution, the financial sector globally, finally getting aligned and putting climate in the center of their agenda, as well as we're seeing nature finally taking the level of relevance that should have always had. We know that the agenda has broadened during these 3 years, bringing in stakeholders from diverse regions across the world and deepening regional engagement with our shared ambitious climate agenda, from 10 states of Brazil to Maharashtra, from large multinational to local shops, from managers, financial managers to hospitals. So while definitely net zero in less than 3 years has gone from extreme to mainstream, we know long-term goals are not enough. And we know that mitigation is not enough. That's why we launched the Race to Resilience, to work on building the resilience for 4 billion people in these decades towards 2030. And we've also positioned the Race to Zero with a concrete focus on halving the emissions by 2030 as the most important of the acts that we need to deliver when it comes to the private sector. So it was science that brought us here. And we can say very proudly that now science or ambition is a synonymous of science when it comes to climate. What we need to do now is make ambition also synonymous of integrity and solidarity. Climate action needs to be spread all around the world. We need to regionalize this agenda. And of course, we understand that it's about working together on a collective, radical way. We call it a new team sport. And I could be no more prouder of having worked these 3 years with the Marrakesh Partnership members. I want to be clear, it is definitely important to look at the whole film, not just stop on the problems that we might be seeing when it comes to the picture, because if we see problems, we might get stopped. We must change our narrative to one that will allow us to see the challenges, because if we see the challenges, that same gap that will allow us to see the opportunities. Let's not stop in the single frame, but rather see the picture. And yes, we have made progress, a lot of progress, but we know that it's not enough. This is not the end of that film. And that's why I'm so delighted that now I can hand over the next scene in this film to my dear friend Nigel Topping to work with the partners and the incoming champion in continuing this vital work.
Thank you so much for demonstrating, really how the agenda has grown. And as you shared, what once seemed radical is now mainstream. So we can have faith in what will happen in the future. But at the same time, we know there's much, much, much work to do. So Nigel, you've shared the champion's role for nearly 2 years with Gonzalo. And can you tell us a bit more about the vision for this agenda and how it's going to evolve forwards and your plans to implement it?
Well, first of all, I have to start by acknowledging that the vision comes from the parties, because the high-level champion's role was created as part of your work back in Paris when you invented the role into being to invite the energy, the dynamism and the capability of non-state actors into the shared project of getting to a zero-carbon resilient world as fast as possible. And we also have to acknowledge the first two champions, our dear friends Laurence Toubian and Hakim El Fayta, who in Morocco at COP, the following COP, launched the Marrakesh Partnership because they saw that this was going to require systems change, all hands on deck approach, and we needed all those partners to organise. And as Gonzalo's described, we've taken advantage of the extra year we've had working together to organise with all those amazing Marrakesh partnerships, and I want to call them all out, the great work they've been doing at the COP and since Morocco when we formed the coalition, to build these three campaigns, the Race to Zero, the Race to Resilience and the Glasgow Financial Alliance. And what we're really focusing on now in this next phase is turning ambition into action, only focusing on action in the next decade. As the Secretary-General said, we're not really interested in 2040 and 2050 talking about action there. Mayors and CEOs who talk about 2040 and 2050 will not be in a position there. And I see here looking at some mayors and CEOs nodding. So it's about how do we turn those commitments into short-term action to drive the changes that we need this decade. And as Gonzalo says, we do have real momentum now, but we really still have a massive piece of work to do in two areas. Firstly, to turn that ambition into action. It's not the same saying we're going to do something as doing it, hence the emphasis on accountability. But also in bridging I would say, an even bigger gap between those newly enthusiastic committing to net zero and playing their part in it, and the largely unheard voices that are not involved in those conversations. And we've heard during this COP, but also in our 2 years, Gonzalo in his 3 years working together, from farmers' groups, from indigenous leaders, from women's groups, and very loudly and constructively from young people at the Youth Summit in Milan, the COI demands which we received here. We've heard pain, frustration, anger, and we have to respond to that. We have to respond to the fact that the poor and the marginalized are the ones suffering the most from climate change, and we have to involve their voices in figuring out the solutions and in delivering them. So how do we go forward? In Madrid, in 1CP25, I've learned a bit of negotiations jargon along the way. You asked the champions to seek feedback and improve the Marrakesh partnership. And what we heard was, be bold. So we're pushing. You can ask any mayor or CEO or governor or investment banker that we've met, and they'll tell you we pushed them. Whenever they say, we'll do it in 2050, we say, why not 2045? Whenever they say 100, we say, why not 1,000? We enjoy that part of the job. You said concentrate more on resilience. We created and launched the Race to Resilience. You said build better bridges between parties and non-parties. So we started innovating in implementation labs in the regional climate weeks. And we worked closely with some of the small island developing states, or big ocean states, as we like to call them, and they like to be thought of, and some of the African countries in party, non-party collaboration, which led to some of the content of the World Leaders Summit earlier last week. You said do more work in the global south. The Marrakesh Partnership is too global north biased, so we've set up teams in Latin America and Africa, small teams, but we'll continue to drive that central gravity from the north to the south in the years to come. You said pay attention to tracking and credibility, so we built a lot of robust standards into the Race to Zero. We have a great expert peer review group, and the science-based targets methodology for net zero is very clear that there isn't a role for offsets instead of the fundamental change in business models and the real reduction in carbon emissions. And transparency has to be at the heart of that in terms of accountability, particularly as commitments soar. And so we really welcome the Secretary General's expert group and look forward to working with that to establish the highest standards of accountability and credibility. So going forward in the plan that we've put forward, I want to draw attention to 3 elements in particular. First, our work to mobilize private finance in emerging markets and developing economies. The demand for capital is staggering and way outstrips what public purses will be able to provide. So we know that the private sector must be mobilized, and we're working hard as one of the work streams in GFANZ with Mark Carney and Shamira Wickramanayake. We know we need to continue raising resilience up the agenda, so it's the equal sibling with mitigation. We know that it's more important for many communities than mitigation. So we're delighted that the Resilience Hub's been a real success here, and we hope that that goes from strength to draw more attention and direct more resources to resilient solutions. Resilient solutions in the most vulnerable communities, where the climate crisis is a felt reality today, not an abstract idea tomorrow. And we commit to further regionalising the work so that we don't operate on global average pathways, but locally contextually specific pathways to net zero resilient futures driven by local knowledge and local partners. Our pledge, and I speak on behalf of my dear friend and partner Gonzalo Munoz, but all past champions and future champions and the Marrakesh Partnership, is to honour the trust that parties have placed in us, to drive momentum from non-state actors in support of all aspects of the Paris Agreement, to offer this as input into the global stocktake as is needed and helpful, and to offer the momentum from non-state actor pathways and action as a source of inspiration for enhanced ambition, and together to drive the ambition loop ever faster until we're on track to and deliver the resilient zero-carbon future that we have collectively promised to future generations.
Thank you so much for laying out really how far we've come, how far the agenda has progressed, but also sharing a vision to the future, whether that's enhancing private finance in emerging economies or looking at how we can drive this climate action through a regionalization approach driven by local knowledge. And I have the opportunity now, Nigel, you will be leading the next panel. We'll get to dive into more frank conversations. So Gonzalo and I will leave so you can welcome your next panel.
So, based on what Gonzalo and I have just outlined, on the one hand, we see huge signals of growing ambition and momentum, and on the other hand, we hear loud voices of skepticism. So the question we're holding is, how do we build trust to ensure that good work is recognized and enhanced and accelerated, and greenwashing is called out? So I want to introduce two very different people from very different backgrounds who have been working together to build trust these last 2 weeks. I'm delighted to be joined on stage by First Minister and co-chair of the Under 2 Coalition, Nicola Sturgeon, and youth climate activist and founder of the Africa-based Rise Up movement, Vanessa Nakate. So, First Minister, you've been involved in addressing the climate crisis for a long time and been leading by taking bold climate action, not just as First Minister of Scotland, but also as the co-chair of the Under 2 Coalition. I don't think it's been renamed, as Gonzalo said, but it's
not yet.
Not yet. But the membership standard, the bar's been raised. Can you share some reflections on the progress you've made, both at home, but also in building this international collaboration?
Thank you very much, and it's a real privilege to take part in this event, and not least to do so with Vanessa. We've made significant progress at home, but we've not gone far enough, and I think it's really important that I recognise the need to go further and faster and take that responsibility seriously. But Scotland has halved emissions already, so we're halfway to net zero, but we've got to get the next half of the journey. We've got a target of net zero by 2045, but I'm very mindful of the comments that have been made already that targets about 2045 or 2050 are meaningless unless we all do what is required by 2030. So recognising that obligation to reduce global emissions by 45% by the end of the decade in Scotland, we've got a responsibility to go further and faster. We've set a 75% reduction target by 2030. It will be tough to achieve, but we have legally binding annual targets that we must report against. We recognise that we are unlikely to meet every target every year, but the importance of having them is that if we fall short in one year, we've got an obligation to catch up. So we're trying to lead by example, recognise where we are doing well, but where we need to do further, and bring that ambition to the Under 2 Coalition, which I'm delighted to see is now a net zero coalition, committed to collectively achieving net zero by 2050, but getting there individually as quickly as possible. But again, rigour, accountability is important, which is why the Secretary-General's announcement on a task force around accountability for non-state actors is so important. And part of the reason I'm sitting here with Vanessa is that I recognise that people like me, our feet do need to be held to the fire, and spending a bit of time over COP with Vanessa has reminded me of the need to constantly push ourselves and challenge ourselves to do ever more difficult things.
Great, thank you, First Minister. Vanessa, I was in Milan at the Youth Summit where you gave a very powerful speech, which started with a quite harrowing account of the human impact of climate change now, today, not abstractly, not tomorrow, and a real call for climate justice. So what I'm and Gonzalo are grappling with is, on the one hand, we have a strong sense that momentum is really building and stuff is really happening, and that we need to hold non-state actors and state actors to account. And yet we're in a world where the emissions are rising still, so the gap between action and impact is still large. How do you think we can navigate the gap between those most affected and not seeing the change, and this sense that momentum is really starting to build now?
Thank you very much. We are, as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently said, on the verge of the abyss. As the IPCC report said, the science is now unequivocal. The latest available science tells us that in order to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis, we must reduce global CO2 emissions by somewhere between 7% to 11% this year and next year, and every year after until we get to zero. So what are we doing to pull ourselves back from the abyss? Countries have come to COP26 to make new pledges to reduce their emissions. And lots of companies and banks and investors have descended upon Glasgow to make big climate commitments. And let me say that, of course, the idea that countries, companies, and investors committing to drastic and immediate action to reduce emissions would be most welcome. But let us be honest, we have been here before. There have been 25 COPs before this one. And every year, leaders come to these climate negotiations with an array of new pledges, commitments, and promises. And as each COP comes and goes, emissions continue to rise. This year will be no different. CO2 emissions are forecast to jump in 2021 by the second biggest annual rise in history. So I hope you can understand why many of the activists who are here in Glasgow and millions of activists who could not be here do not see the success that is being applauded within these halls. I hope that you can appreciate that the 9 million people dying every year from breathing toxic air, from fossil fuel-driven air pollution, do not have decades to wait for oil, gas, and coal to be phased out. I hope you can appreciate that we may be skeptical when the largest delegation here at the COP26 Climate Summit does not belong to a country, but instead belongs to the fossil fuel industry. I hope you can appreciate that where I live, a 2-degree world means that 1 billion people will be affected by extreme heat stress. In a 2-degree Celsius world, some places in the global south will regularly reach a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the human body cannot cool itself by sweating. At that temperature, even healthy people sitting in the shade will die within 6 hours. We see business leaders and investors flying into COP on private jets. We see them making fancy speeches. We hear about new pledges and promises. But we are drowning in promises. Commitments will not reduce CO2. Promises will not stop the suffering of the people. Pledges will not stop the planet from warming. Only immediate and drastic action will pull us back from the abyss. So we have some who are already starting to call COP26 a success. But a few days ago, a climate action tracker report showed that COP26 is actually putting us on a pathway for a 2.4 degrees Celsius world. And this is our problem. We have two pathways. There is the pathway of commitments and hype and promises and fanciful net zero targets and happily ever after. And then there is the pathway of the best available science, of ever stronger storms and droughts and floods, of toxic polluted air, of real people suffering and dying. And these two pathways are diverging. The truth is that the atmosphere doesn't care about commitments. It only cares about what we put into it or stop putting into it. Humanity will not be saved by promises. It's hard to believe business and finance leaders when they haven't delivered before. They have not been faithful in their promises. They have not been honest in fulfilling their commitments. They have not been trustworthy in making their pledges a reality. So, I have come here to tell you that we don't believe you. We don't believe that banks will suddenly put trillions of dollars on the table for climate action when rich countries have struggled since 2009 to raise $100 billion for the world's most vulnerable countries. We don't believe that promises made by financial companies to end deforestation will actually prevent trees from being cut or burnt down. We simply don't believe it. But I am here right now to ask business and finance leaders, show us your faithfulness, show us your trustworthiness, show us your honesty. I am here to say, prove us wrong. I'm actually here to beg you to prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. Please, prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us. Thank you.
So, Vanessa, I hope you can tell from the length and the warmth of the applause that people agree with you. That there's an expression that comes to mind that we use that says, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. And it seems that trust has run over the hill and far away, and what you're asking for is evidence of a first step back towards trust, and that it will be a long way back. So I hope that every mayor, every governor, every CEO of a business, every banker, every investor hears that call to prove the skeptics wrong, because the skepticism is not without reason. Because it's a, as you say, we've had broken promises before, so thank you very much, Vanessa. You also, I mean, you referred to the science of wet bulb temperature. If anybody, you know, one of the things I think that we're starting to see is culture and the arts coming into this, helping translate the science of the climate crisis in the way that only the arts can do. And there's an amazing book by Kim Stanley Robinson, who's been here, called The Ministry for the Future, which starts with one of the most harrowing chapters of fiction that I have ever read, which deals with a wet bulb temperature, an extreme heat event with awful consequences. Vanessa, I want to come back to you with one more question. You know, you've published a book. You asked me the other day if I'd read it. I've got it now. I haven't read it, but I was just skimming through it. And, you know, you highlight unheard stories and untold voices. You talked about Mama Mugera, the plantain saleswoman, and how her life was affected by COVID. So you have a skill of bringing the abstractness of promises and climate science into daily lives. And You know, we've had lots of help in that with some of our ambassadors and friends, and on this stage, Tasneem Messop and Clover Hogan spoke very passionately. Salim Hook and Sheila Patel have helped us with this as well, to really emphasise the need for more support for the communities for whom the climate crisis is a reality now. You are particularly eloquent on this subject in Milan when you talked about the need for more emphasis on loss and damage. Could you put that in, tell us where that comes from a personal perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Loss and damage is something that is happening right now in so many communities across the global south. And as we head on a pathway of 2.4, I can say that is a death sentence for so many communities that are already on the front lines of the climate crisis, communities that didn't cause the climate crisis, that are least responsible. Historically, Africa is responsible for only 3% of global emissions, and yet many Africans are suffering some of the most brutal impacts fueled by the climate crisis. So with the rising global temperatures, with the changes in weather patterns, people are losing so many things. Loss and damage is happening right now. I have given a number of stories, personal stories of what I've seen, of what people have told me. And to us, you know, finance has been promised, you know, for mitigation, for adaptation, but we need a separate fund for loss and damage, because finance for adaptation is critical, finance for mitigation is critical, but for many of us in vulnerable countries, we cannot adapt anymore to the climate crisis. We cannot adapt to lost identities. We cannot adapt to lost cultures. We cannot adapt to lost histories as the climate crisis is sweeping and washing everything away. We cannot adapt to lost biodiversity, and we cannot adapt to extinction. We cannot adapt to starvation. So as the climate crisis escalates, communities are losing their farms, communities are losing their homes, people are losing their businesses, people are losing their livelihoods, their cultures. This is why it's important to see that a fund, a separate fund for loss and damage is put in place, and it's a start to know that, it's a good start to know that Scotland has put in some money on that fund, and it recently doubled the finance for the fund to 2 million. Yes, and this is just a start, and we want more businesses, more countries, more investors to put money in this loss and damage fund, because we need finance for communities that are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think with the next COP being in Africa, I'm sure that with whoever my future colleague as climate champion is, will be seeing whatever we can do to bring the non-state actor community of cities, business investors into finding solutions in this area as well. So thank you. And First Minister, back to you. You've focused a lot on inclusivity and on the just transition in your work in Scotland. You've partnered with the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. Vanessa's talked about some of your contributions, which you've doubled today. Can you say a little bit about the role of solidarity, both within and between nations and communities, in making this transition real?
I would put it stronger than solidarity. Rich developed countries like this one owe an obligation, a debt to developed vulnerable countries, because we've created climate change, we've benefited through generations from the emissions that have been pumped into the atmosphere, and countries like Vanessa's are right now paying the price. Finance is key to this, not as an act of charity, but as an act of reparation. And I would say two things, echo entirely Vanessa's comments about the $100 billion a year commitment. There's many things that Glasgow has to achieve, and I hope we will see them achieved over the next 48 hours or so. But one relatively straightforward thing that should be achieved, and there is no excuse for not achieving, is meeting that £100 billion commitment. It was made 12 years ago. It will be shameful if we come out of this COP without that commitment being met in full. And we can't. And for rich countries, that should be relatively easy to do. So to world leaders, I'd say, please don't miss that opportunity. And we must, mitigation, adaptation, hugely important, but countries are suffering right now the loss and damage of the impact that is being felt now, and we have to step up and recognise the obligation we have to countries to help deal with that. Scotland has tried at this COP, given we're the host country, to put loss and damage on the agenda for the first time. Loss and damage must now be on the agenda of every COP from here on, but more than on the agenda. We must start to see real money delivered to this. It is, again, I'm glad that Scotland has made the commitment, but we must see more countries come forward. It is not good enough that there is one country, and only one country in the world, that has made any financial commitment to this. So this has to be something that we see real progress on. It's not too late at this COP. Scotland's a small country. Our contribution is always going to be tiny in a global scale. But we had already, coming into this COP, made a commitment to double our Climate Justice Fund and set money aside for loss and damage as well. Today, we've announced we're not going to double it, we're going to treble it. And why are we doing that? To send a message to every world leader around the negotiating table: step up in Glasgow and let the rich countries start to pay their debt to the developing and vulnerable countries across the world. It is no longer good enough, and there is no longer any excuse for not doing so.
Thank you, First Minister. Thank you, Vanessa. I mean, the trust gap is in the room. Now we have lots of big promises, and we have a call to prove the doubters wrong. And I think also your last illustration is an example of why non-state actors, a rather clumsy term, meaning everybody who's not a party to the agreement, so non-party governments, businesses, all have the ability to drive this ambition loop faster by doing something maybe more ambitious than the national governments who do have a seat at the table. So thank you so much for your frank and really helpful reflections to illuminate the challenge we have going forward. This ends our first panel, and I'd like to hand back to Selina Abraham.
Thank you so much, Nigel, First Minister, and Vanessa, for that conversation. I think we all felt the waves of emotions coming through just from listening to this conversation, and I invite us to sit in it. Yes, we have our commitments, but we also have the demands of our people. We have our visionary plans, but we also have the responsibility of taking care of the most vulnerable. So as we sit in this real and raw human emotion, we need to channel it, to be energized, to go beyond what we think is possible and do what is absolutely necessary. So I want to introduce this next panel that'll build on this conversation about building trust that has been lost, rebuilding relationships that have been broken, and understanding that what actions we need to take moving forward. So I'd like to now welcome Gonzalo back to the stage, and to also invite Ana Lucia Vilela, the president of the Alana Foundation, Sadiq Khan, mayor of London and incoming chair of C40, and Manuel Pulgar Vidal, who's the global lead on climate and energy at WWF. Welcome.
Well, first, thanks so much, Vanessa, First Minister, and Nigel. I mean, we saw from, not only from the reactions, probably all of us are feeling that conversation, and it will stay with us for really long time. And I would like to start by giving us 5 seconds of reflection. So I will ask for 5 seconds of silence. So the invitation is now to listen deeply about what we've just heard and analyze how we can build from this and hold ourselves accountable, right? That's what it's all about. And again, kind of back to the film, I think that the question is, how can we take this momentum that we have been seeing over the last months and years and then turn all of this into real concrete action in the next 12 months, right? We know we cannot wait for years to come. It's now when we have to deliver. And therefore, we will require innovative thinking. We know that it will be a lot about thinking differently in order to implement and then move forward in the right possible way. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Analu, Major Khan, and Manuel Pulgar Vidal, our dear friend, or I mean, 3 dear friends on stage. And I would like to start with you, Analu, if possible. You are part of the Latin American banking history. And also, I would say you're part of the Latin American care for nature history. So, if I may, I would like you to reflect on those 2 elements and how those 2 elements are somehow shifting the approach of the non-state actors towards a common goal and bringing nature into the center of the agenda and maybe reflecting into the next 5 years.
Okay. So nice to be here. Thank you, Gonzalo.
Maybe approach closer to the microphone.
Okay. So I think that I think the state is just one of the ways a society can organize itself. So when human life is at risk, as is the case right now, non-state actors begin to act more together. NGOs, companies, banks, universities, press, entertainment industry, everybody. They have to mobilize and act together and act more, if only for the sake of extinction for survival. So I think that we all understand we have to do something urgently. And a plan of having a green economy is the only way to thrive. And thinking as a bank, it's also the only way for a bank to thrive. You know, it's implementing it. We need to trust each other. We need accountability. And it's urgent. We need to do it. At Itaú Bank, we clearly understand that we will only achieve a sustainable future if we build everything together with our clients and in a collaboratively, you know, with all stakeholders. It's impossible to give one step further without sharing, without doing it together. Becoming net zero bank is not only wanting a better future for all, but it also makes economic sense. So I really wish that all banks become soon net zero, because it's the only way we can do this. It's everybody together. And talking about making sense, I think that the most valuable things in the planet are clean water, clean air, healthy food, biodiversity, and with a just transition. That's what I believe.
Thanks so much, Analu. Manuel, you know the COP process really well. You were the COP20 president, and most of us know very well that this agenda, meaning the agenda of the non-state actors and the Marrakesh Partnership, was built through the Lima Paris Action Agenda, and you were in those initial days. We call you the godfather of the Marrakesh Partnership. And I think it would be great to receive from you your reflections in terms of what does it mean, that film that I was referring to from your point of view, but also how do you see this mandate, the Marrakesh Partnership playing the role in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Gonzalo, and hello to you all. Look, it is true, I am very proud that we started this in 2014 with at that time it was called the Lima-Paris Action Agenda. So that was the starting time. We convened the first Action Day, 2014, some years ago. And it was Paris and then Morocco that consolidated the process and launched the Marrakesh Partnership. And also that helped to organize sectors, and that was like the second step. So a starting point, organize sectors, and then we move into trying to have sectors defining more clearly targets. And now we are entering into a new phase. And what the Secretary General has just told us, it is so important. It is the phase of credibility. So let me start by saying that what we must recognize it is how important it is to insist in this kind of processes. But that is not enough. Because what we do need it is to make an accurate use of the processes by having clear targets based on science and with mechanisms that can make people and citizens to track progress. That is for me a key element of the action agenda. Because look, we came to the COP26 with two main ideas, the ambition gap and the financial gap. But the Secretary General has just mentioned the credibility gap. It's amazing, it is real. The people is on the street demanding for credibility. And that is something that I am sure that based on the mandate and the new Marrakesh Partnership 2.0, that can be addressed by this platform. But by the end, friends, that depends not on the two champions. Great friends, really congratulations for all what you have done. But depends on the implementation, that it is related to the actors. Because now I am used to thinking there are three options, no more than that. Or we keep this process alive by using it in an accurate way, by being clear and by promoting credibility, or we will receive regulations, impositions, and mandate by the law and by the rules, or worse than that, it will be courts that will demand us to act. So depend on us. So if we really want to keep this process alive, to really keep this joint effort in between the public and the private, to exploit the potential of the Marrakesh Partnership in this new phase, we do need to play our part. If not, we know what it could be the consequences. So we have the mandate, we have the new Marrakesh Partnership 2.0, that it is a fantastic one, and congratulations again, but depend on us of continue building this credibility by promoting clarity. The people is demanding clarity. Let me finish by saying, the lack of credibility, it is putting more people on the streets. So what we do need is to recover the people into the process, to recover that hope. And it is just by doing that that we will give a new impulse to the process. If not, we are going to damage our own process. It is in our hands, but depends on all of us.
Thanks so much, Manuel. Mayor Khan, working with Nigel and a broader UK team, I've been living virtually in London for the last 2 years, right? But I haven't had the possibility of experience so close all the work that you're doing on transitioning towards a net zero city that is now positioned towards the 1.5 degrees. You can share what are those innovations and what are you implementing, please?
Sure. Look, my experience studying COP for the last 26 years, and I don't mean to be offensive, is a lot of national governments have moved from being climate change deniers to delaying taking action on climate change, whereas in cities, we're doers. And the difference between national governments and cities is the difference between night and day, between delayers and doers. So in London, we have an air pollution crisis directly linked with the climate emergency. You can't see the toxicity in our air, but it leads to thousands of premature deaths. It leads to children having stunted lungs and adults with a whole host of health issues, from asthma to cancer, from dementia to heart disease. So in 2018, we declared a climate emergency, and in 2019, we launched the world's first ultra-low emission zone. And it works on a simple principle: the polluter pays. If you have a polluting vehicle that's putting out poison, you pay. In 2 years, we've seen the toxic air in central London reduce by 50%, a 44% reduction in NOx, a 27% reduction in particulate matter, a 6% reduction in carbon. And last week, I extended the ULEZ, so it now covers almost 4 million people, double the size of Paris. That city's doing rather than delaying.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mayor. And I will go back now to you, Manuel, to take that and say, well, when it comes to scaling this globally, what do we need to unlock to rapidly scale commitments like the one Mayor Khan have just referred to, and even Alok with the bank? How can we scale that globally?
Look, in this time in which we have to implement clear actions, I think that there are some key principles. I am sure that you all have seen this meme that is saying, "I will quit alcohol in 2050. It is true, it sounds a joke. It is exactly the same. So the point is, how can we connect the long-term vision with strong and real short-term actions? That it is about. And because of what the Secretary General mentioned of this credibility gap, I think that we have to frame those actions, in my point of view, in 5 key principles. The first one is that it must be oriented to real reductions. That is key. That is a priority. No excuses, no alternative mechanism to divest or to avoid, to fulfill with our top obligation. The second one is that we must push actors to define targets based on science. And we know that we have SBTi, it's a great mechanism, but for sure it is not mandatory. So how can we encourage actors to join SBTi? To in some way sanction to them that are not willing to join SBTi, or whatever it could be, that body that will define the science, the targets based on science. The third principle is that it should be within the value chain. So the real reduction, it must be focused in scope 1, 2, and 3. And nobody should be able to go beyond the value chain if they had not first defined their targets within the value chain. The fourth principle is that it must be a rights-based approach. So any mechanism must be based on defending and protecting rights. That is key. Many people is thinking that many of the mechanisms have been developed to affect rights, and for sure that shouldn't be the way. And the fifth principle is that it must have MRB mechanism, because transparency and ways to verify are a key element of this. So if we are able to agree in those 5 principles, I think that we can make and scale up this agenda in a strong way.
Thanks so much, Manuel. Mayor Khan, you just reflected on the role of the City of London, but now you're taking a new position as the head of the C40 coalition. So I would like you to reflect on that role in terms of how the mayoral leadership can drive the structural change that is needed. So start activating the ambition loop, right?
Yeah. Well, let me give you an example of how C40 operates. So C40 are basically 97 megacities around the globe, from London to Los Angeles, from Bogota to Barcelona, from Durban to Dhaka. We represent more than 700 million people, and we're responsible for more than a quarter of the global wealth. We all have agreed to sign up to the climate change adaptation plans set up by Paris. More than two-thirds of the 97 cities, so 65 cities, more than two-thirds are either on schedule for meeting the Paris promise or exceeding meeting the Paris promise. Compare and contrast how many countries are on course to meeting Paris or exceeding? One. So 66% cities meeting Paris or beating it, 0.5% countries doers versus delayers. That's the difference C40 is making. I'll give you some examples. We've agreed last week, my first speech as the incoming C40 chair. In my first budget, more than two-thirds of the C40 budget will go to the global south. As Nicola Sturgeon said, we have a responsibility. It's not a patronising charity. We've got a responsibility. I believe those with the broadest shoulders carry the greatest burden. We announced today $1 billion to provide electric buses to cities in Latin America. And by the way, Bogota, the wonderful city of Bogota, has more electric buses than any city in the world outside of China. The difference progressive, nimble cities are making. And our vision is to make sure we have a green recovery from this pandemic, to make sure that we help the global south, but also to make sure that we collaborate. We are a partnership. We work together. We don't see countries we don't act like countries seeing each other as competitors. We see each other as collaborators and partners working together.
Thanks so much, Mayor. Ana Lu, we know each other for a long time, and I can share with the audience that I first met you as one of the co-founders of Maria Farinha Films, a B Corp in Brazil with your husband, Marco. Then I got to know you because you're one of the co-founders of Instituto Alana, one of the most important institutes working on mobilizing the right type of education and culture and giving the base for the early stages of education in kids in different parts, at least in Brazil and also in Latin America. But then I got to know that you were also one of the co-owners of the biggest bank in Latin America. So for me, it was a beautiful surprise in that sense. And I would like you to reflect on those three hats that you can share with the audience, because I think that we're confronting a paradigm shift. Some things are changing, and that is offering the opportunity of having and setting a new culture of how all of those elements can be integrated into the trajectory to a net zero resilient world.
It's not that they can be integrated, they are integrated. You know, it's just, I think we have to occupy all spaces, and it's easy to see that we all as humans, we all want the same thing. And, you know, we have to work with each other, so it's not difficult to understand that. I'll start talking about the organization, which is Alana, which is my big passion. So we've been working with children's rights for many years now, including climate justice. And I think that for us to change, to shift paradigm, I think it's only going to be through behavioral change and lots of technology, including innovation there. Everywhere. It's not just for the kids or youth, but it's on companies, banks. We have to shift, you know, the way, our behavior. We have to. And talking about technology, I'll start with technology. I just wanted to say that I think it's so important to invest in technology. I really think it's going to help us. We, at Alana, we fund the Rainforest X Prize, which is a global competition that will improve technologies for biodiversity assessment. And our goal is to review the value of the standing forest and to accelerate bioeconomy. So when us from the third sector invest in a competition like this, and we have teams all over the globe taking part of this competition, the result of this will really help the bioeconomy. It will help many companies. It will help many startups, banks, and so on, and governments. So everything is related, you know. I'll give you an example of behavior change. We have a project that I love at Alana that is called a program. It's called Children in Nature. And our projects are ensuring that kids have a healthy and direct access with the contact with nature, because this makes them understand, you know, understanding the interdependence of all systems and beings. So I think this is essential knowledge, and experience allows this experience of being in the nature, the kids being in the nature, we better develop them knowing the impacts of their actions in their relationship with the environment and with others. It will build them empathy, which is really important. And by the way, not only for kids, but for all of us, being in nature is so important to build empathy. We'll only take care of the things we love, right? So, in addition to these actions with children and nature in the areas of education, advocacy there, we just launched a film called The Beginning of Life Outside. And this film, like one film, is making parents take kids to nature after watching it, you know. And they are changing their environments at their homes, at schools, in their communities. So the impact of movies, I think so, trying to change behavior is extremely important. Alana believes that entertainment is a behavior change tool. And we've produced many movies because of that. So talking about the B Corp we have, the B production company we have. So next week, we will launch the second season of the environmental thriller called Aruanas. The first season was about the Amazon, and 35 million people only in Brazil watched the series. And the second season will be about fossil fuel subsidies. And so in the first one about the Amazon and river contamination due to illegal mining, these are topics that have been discussed here at COP. So I think it's extremely important for everybody to understand what we are discussing here, so that they can advocate and take part of the problem and the solutions, right? And so we conducted a survey to track those 35 million people who watched the first season, to see, and we found to see what they found. What we found out is that 87% of them, after watching the first season, they delved deeper into the theme, and they looked for ways of helping the Amazon in a practical way. So that's how one of an amazing tool we have. So I believe we can do it, and I believe we have many ways of doing that. I'm just giving you some examples of the things I think it's important. We also brought to this COP, talking about COP, a cute rich research on children that we did all over Brazil, and we heard the voices of multiple childhoods. And in this, the data we collect, the word that most appeared among the voices of kids was fear. The study was to hear what they thought about climate change. And all of them, mostly all of them, said fear. But at the same time, there's a beautiful thing that is, it showed us that children, they also said that they do believe in us, and they hope we will fix it, you know, what we did. So I think we should invest a lot in education, children and youth, and listen to them. This is the best thing we can do. It's really invest in our major asset, in this planet, which is human beings, right? We have to invest on them. So let's act for the planet that children have now and in the future. That's what I want.
Well, I just want to thank the three of you. I think that we've been capable of landing for many of the opportunities, some of them through the three of you. So thanks so much, and I ask Salina to continue for the program.
Gonzalo, I would like to make something out of agenda. It will take 1 minute. We know that by the end of this COP, Gonzalo will leave us as high-level champion of the action agenda. And it's a great guy, good friend, great champion, and great leader. And I think that we all can give a friendly and warmly farewell with a big applause to all your work.
What an incredible session. We've covered so much in such a short amount of time, reflecting on how far we've come, moving from 10 companies in one initiative to 1,000. There's no doubt that, as Mayor Khan said, this non-state actor agenda is full of doers. So we have heard, the importance of science-based targets, ways that we can really rebuild trust and accountability and build credibility so that we can not only prove Vanessa wrong, but to save our planet in any sense of dignity we can have as climate leaders. So I want to now transition. I'm so pleased to conclude this part of the session and now hand over to Federica Fricano, who is the Vice President of COP26, to moderate the responses from the parties.
Thank you very much, Salina. Dear delegate, it's now my pleasure to open the floor for intervention from parties. Your Excellencies, Mrs. Teresa Ribera, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for the Ecological Transition of the Government of Spain, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Federica. And I also want to join Manuel in these congratulations and gratitude to Gonzalo. Gonzalo has been quite instrumental, helpful, and an open mind that allows us to understand to what extent we need to work together. I think that this is the main point, the main additional point we have got along this year. Remember, in Madrid, we were talking about the possibility of extending the mandate of the champions. And of course, we did up to 2025, and it was worth it. I think that what if we could not have extended your mandate in these long 2 years that we have gone through? So thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Gonzalo. More comments about this, couple of additional ideas. The first of them is that what we are tackling with is credibility and our trust and confidence on our capacity to change things, understanding that this is not just a mission, even if the responsibility is huge on the side of national governments. We need the whole society moving forward, a deep transformation on the way we produce, we consume, we understand prosperity, and we build a new Green Deal. Green because it has to be within the planetary boundaries, deal because we need justice, we need commitment, we need engagement from companies and corporates, we need engagement from the society, we need intergenerational justice, and within the same generation in different countries, within the same societies. And this is a role that needs to be played and needs to be facilitated in this context of the global action agenda. And I think that we have learned a lot on how to tackle the difficulties and the challenges. We need to feed into the hope and the positive envy, the willing to do more and quicker. And the Race to Zero has speed up the capacity to expect others doing things. But we also need credibility in the way we measure and we provide inputs to the society, because we need citizens supporting and asking for more and not having doubts on what the different engagements and promises and targets mean. So we need action. It is a race, it is credibility, it is action, paving the way for a different future. And I think that providing energy to feed up into this race is something that we need to do together. So I also think that the commitment from the Secretary General saying that he will be providing some additional inputs to ensure that we can trust what it is being said by different corporates on what they commit to do, it is important. And my very last comment is dealing with this idea of moving in different aspects and providing platforms to think differently and to innovate. I think that social innovation is also very important, and what we have been doing in this race to zero, that it is not challenged anymore by anyone. We need to race to zero, is also social innovation and governance innovation. So thanks a lot, and of course, count on us, count on Spain to keep on going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa, for your intervention. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mrs. Rosa Morales, National Director for Climate Change and Desertification of the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Peru, speaking on behalf of ILAC. Madam, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Como usted ha dicho, el Perú tiene el honor de realizar esta intervención en nombre del grupo de los países ILAC, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Panamá, Paraguay y el Perú. En primer lugar, queremos destacar y agradecer el arduo y constante esfuerzo que los campeones de alto nivel para la acción climática, Gonzalo Muñoz, representante de la Presidencia de Chile, miembro de ILAC, y Nigel Topping, representante de la Presidencia del Reino Unido, bajo cuyo liderazgo se ha logrado una aceleración exponencial de la participación en el incremento de la ambición y acción de los actores no estatales en reducir emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero hacia la neutralidad del carbono y el incremento de la capacidad de adaptación y resiliencia a los efectos del cambio climático, siempre manteniendo este balance entre mitigación y adaptación. Este bienvenido liderazgo se construye sobre la base de iniciativas previas, en particular a partir de la Agenda de Acción Lima-París, iniciativa conjunta de las presidencias peruana y francesa de la COP20, lanzada en la COP21 en Lima, que destacó y movilizó la acción sólida de empresas y otros actores no estatales en la reducción de las emisiones de carbono y el impulso de sociedades resilientes. Recibimos con mucho interés la visión a 5 años de la Alianza Marrakech para la Acción Climática Mundial, que busca, entre otros aspectos, mejorar los mecanismos de enlace y participación con los actores no estatales, presentada por los champions de alto nivel. Asimismo, confiamos que las campañas Race to Zero y Race to Resilience, lanzadas desde la última COP en Madrid, seguirán movilizando a una comunidad cada vez más creciente de actores no estatales, tanto de ciudades, regiones, actores de la sociedad civil y empresas. Esta COP ha demostrado que los actores no estatales, en su diversidad, ya están asumiendo un liderazgo cada vez más creciente e importante. Iniciativas tales como el Resilience Hub, apoyado por el Gobierno del Perú, es una muestra efectiva de ello. Por lo tanto, damos nuestro pleno respaldo a la visión de 5 años para la Alianza de Marrakech para la Acción Climática y cuenten con nosotros para lograr su implementación. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias for your intervention. And now it's my great pleasure to give the floor to Your Excellencies Andrej Višnjak, Minister of the Environment and Spatial Planning of the Republic of Slovenia, speaking on behalf of the EU. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. Let me start by thanking the high-level champions, Gonzalo Unos and Nigel Topping, and their team for extraordinary efforts these past 2 years. Despite the challenges the world has experienced during the pandemic, you have managed to strengthen the spirit of the Marrakesh Partnership and showcased ways we can enhance global climate action. Congratulations. Non-state actors are showing us the Paris Agreement goals are within reach and urging us to use the opportunities in the transition to climate neutrality. We welcome their further efforts towards the effective implementation of Paris Agreement. Strong linkage between intergovernmental and non-state action are key for the changes we need. Therefore, aligning the work of the Marrakesh Partnership with the ambitious cycle of Paris Agreement is very important for us. At this COP, we have seen a very inspiring program across the Marrakesh Partnership activities. The EU was happy to endorse the Glasgow breakthrough. We have seen widespread engagement from youth to business leaders and civil society. For the EU, it is important that we continue strengthening and improving the Marrakesh Partnership. We think the new priorities you pose are very good ones. We need everybody on board if we want to accelerate the green transition and make it on time. This is the objective for the European Climate Pact. Every action counts. We already have well over 500 ambassadors, volunteers, who spread inspiration and action in their communities. We are also collecting pledges that go beyond legal requirements and that turn all types of organization into multipliers of climate information and action in the green transition. Finally, let me conclude by expressing support to your work as high-level champions. You are inspiring so many people around the world, and we are proud of the outcomes under the Marrakesh Partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Vice, for your intervention. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Mrs. Milagros Marina de Camps, Deputy Minister of Planning, International Cooperation and Climate Change of the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of the Dominican Republic. Speaking on behalf of our houses. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies and colleagues, I am delivering this statement on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. I know that we often open with that line, but I want for a moment to explain why the high-level champions and the Marrakesh Partnership is critical to my group of countries. While we know that the effects of this climate crisis will impact all states, the early effects are being felt most acutely in the small islands. We are already seeing sustained and substantial impacts on our economies, livelihoods, and societies. 1.5 degrees is not just a target, but a necessary precondition to our continued existence. But the recent NDC synthesis report was clear that the current level of ambition in the NDCs is neither sufficient to meet the net zero pledges, nor to get on a 1.5 degree pathway. Quite simply, we are not doing enough, and not doing enough in the near term. For small islands, near-term action is critical. Greater action by states and non-state actors alike is critical. And so the work of the Marrakesh Partnership is critical. This alignment between the needs of small islands and the work of the Marrakesh Partnership is not an accident. AOSIS was the earliest and potentially strongest supporter of what would become the Marrakesh Partnership. Many elements, including the champions themselves, were first conceived in AOSIS submissions. This is not to take credit for Marrakesh Partnership, but rather to make this point. AOSIS spent years thinking and working to establish this stream of work, but even in our wildest dreams, our final outcome was never as robust comprehensive, or effective as the Marrakesh Partnership is today. The work of the champions over the past 3 years has been without end, and we would hope that the parties reflect our thanks in the COP decisions. The 5-year vision on improving the Marrakesh Partnership released by the champions earlier this month is an excellent response to the extended mandate given to them at COP25. In particular, we would like to highlight 3 things. First, regionalizing the Marrakesh Partnership is critical. We need increased engagement of the Global South, both state and non-state actors, in the work of the Marrakesh Partnership. Regionalization will enhance engagement and effectiveness. It should result in new multi-stakeholder alliances that spur global and regional transitions in sectors like tourism and expanding technologies like green hydrogen. Second, the increased focus on adaptation, including the race to resilience, is also welcome. For many small islands, our potential for mitigation is limited, but our need for adaptation is very large. Increasing the engagement of non-state actors in adaptation work can only help us in becoming more resilient. Third, we appreciate how the work of the Marrakesh Partnership has begun to align with the ambition cycle in the Paris Agreement. We have long thought that increased action by non-state actors and increased information on mitigation and adaptation potentials can lead to greater ambition from states. Finally, on behalf of the 39 states of AOSIS, we would like to thank our 2 high-level champions, Gonzalo and Nigel, for their work and enthusiasm. You have injected new life into the Marrakesh Partnership. We hope and expect that this renewed Marrakesh Partnership will help us get on a pathway to 1.5 degrees. We thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Yukata Shoda, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, Minister of Environment of Japan. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Japan would like to congratulate all ambitious activities by the high-level champion and non-party stakeholders across the world under the Marrakesh Partnership, demonstrating the clear pathway towards a net zero world. I also would like to highlight the vital roles that sub-national governments could perform in realizing a zero-carbon society, as they can formulate and implement a sector-wide and locally designed plan. In the case of Japan, the national government formulated a comprehensive roadmap for pushing local communities to achieve net zero by 2050. We plan to support more than 100 leading areas in mobilizing to draw out their decarbonization efforts one after another. We call it the decarbonization domino effect. So far, almost 500 municipalities covering around 90% of Japan's population have declared to aim zero-carbon cities. Japan's effort will go beyond our borders to accelerate the domino effect globally. We held the first Zero-Carbon City International Forum with collaboration on UNFCCC. Around 40 national and local governments, as well as international organizations, shared their ambitious actions and good practices. We will convene the second forum early next year in cooperation with the United States and the Global Subnational Zero Carbon Promotion Initiative, which was launched yesterday. Madam Chair, Japan has been closely working with high-level champions to accelerate local actions. Japan commits to make best efforts to develop multi-level actions and accelerate domino effects around the world to realize decarbonized society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister, for your intervention. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Jonathan Pershing, Deputy Special Presidential Envoy of the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a great pleasure to have a chance to be here to offer some of the U.S. perspectives at this session. I'd like to start off by really congratulating our high-level champions and their really extraordinary teams for the work that we have seen that they have undertaken. It's an extraordinary array of events that they have overseen over the course of this last year. I think from our perspective, some of the most significant things that have happened at this COP are not ones that will be fully recognized in the cover decision because they fall outside of the remit of all countries, but are substantial activities from subsets, players in the corporate community, in civil society, in other elements of our governments at the city and the state level. And we often don't find a very strong way to recognize those transitions. But the champions have, I think, indicated to us through their work and the work of those they've organized how central those activities are to implementation. There's an enormous number of campaigns that are part of this. The Race to Zero campaign may be one example that it's worth highlighting. This is, after all, where we are collectively trying to go, and mobilizing the greatest possible group of players in support of that agenda is the work that we have seen carried forward. I would say these commitments are important in their own right in amounting to a vigorous all-of-society response to the climate crisis. But they also strengthen the confidence of governments to raise their ambition. And they're a vital component of the overall package from Glasgow. This success is certainly testament to the value of integrating non-state actors and the overall action agenda into our process, a very strong proof of concept. We welcome, Madam Chair, we welcome and support the champion's vision for strengthening the Marrakesh Partnership. This kind of process needs to go forward stronger than ever to deliver what we must deliver on the ground. And it becomes all the more important as the UNFCCC shifts from negotiation to implementation. There are huge opportunities to be had in the lessons we have learned, in the partnerships we have forged, in the identification of gaps and of opportunities, and the insight we contribute to governments as we scale up ambition in this decisive decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pershing, for your intervention. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mrs. Mari Elena Castillo Marcical, Deputy Head of Delegation, Climate Change Directorate, Ministry of Environment of Panama. Madam, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Panama will take this opportunity to channel the voice of the global youth. We are indigenous leaders, lawyers, researchers, organizers, and artists. We have changed laws, amended constitutions, and defended land through social media, direct action, and divesting millions. We decide elections. We pressure you into agreement in Paris, yet we are excluded from full engagement for its implementation. This must change. This is a message for state and corporate leaders. We are not going anywhere. We will use our growing power to hold you accountable. You say your actions are ambitious, but your ambitions keep us on track to a fatal 2.4 degrees of warming. We look to you as global leaders, yet your actions are failing us. Leaders don't settle for anything less than 1.5. Leaders defend people and biodiversity above profit and politics. Leaders present NDCs that actually get us to real zero. Leaders bring youth from all genders, indigenous people, and the most marginalized to the negotiating table. Leaders give youth the power to negotiate their own future as Panama did. Leaders reach 1.5 by safeguarding human and indigenous rights, including in the design of Article 6 mechanisms. Leaders reach 1.5 by cutting emissions at the source and funding solutions that end intersectional oppression and systemic violence. Leaders build resilience with nature through decentralized and community-led solutions. Leaders reach 1.5 while financing loss and damage by funding the least responsible and most affected. Leaders act with intersectionality at all times. Leaders see the response to COVID-19 as the single greatest generational opportunity for climate action and economic justice. 1.5 is the simplest moral choice in all of history. Paris promised 1.5, but lack of leadership is giving us 2.4 degrees of deadly warming. 1.5 is not a choice. It is a necessity, a moral obligation, a lifeline. On behalf of over 11,000 youth from more than 129 nations, you must take actions immediately to ensure 1.5. Lead, be bold. Thank you.
Madam Chair, delegates, friends, I'm moved, I thank you, and I'm tension because we cannot declare any kind of victory. We've just heard the level of challenges that we're still facing, and we know that it will be, as Sheila Patel says very well, the poor woman of the world, the one that will decide whether we succeed or not. But also, if there's a small understanding of we having done something good, there's no possibility of success when it's individual. So success, if not shared, is a defeat. So I just want to thank all of you. I've been working with the most brilliant person in the world, Nigel Topping. The size of the heart and the mind and the passion of this individual will lead us in front next year with, I would expect, a fantastic champion from Egypt towards the implementation of this plan and towards the implementation of the Paris Agreement. But I will refer to all of the Marrakesh Partnership members and all of the delegates that have not only spoken today, but all of you that have provided us the support in order to be able to be accountable to an amazing mandate that you have given us. So I'm just extremely grateful for the opportunity that was offered to me. I thank, of course, my family for the support and my partners, but mostly I want to say that I will continue working until we reach the net zero resilient world that we require urgently. Thanks so much.
Madam Chair, delegates, friends, everybody who's watching, Gonzalito, mi amigo para siempre. First of all, I want to thank Gonzalo. It's a matter of real sadness to me that he steps down tomorrow, but as he said, he can run, but he can't hide. He's going to be involved in this agenda forever, as will I be. I want to thank all the courageous voices who hold the mirror up to us to remind us that despite the fact that we are making good progress, we're still woefully short of what future generations deserve and are demanding. And I want to repeat my promise to you as parties and to all the observer groups and all the young people alive today and to come that we, Gonzalo and I, past champions, future champions and all the Marrakesh partners, commit to honour the trust that you, the parties, have placed in us to drive real change in the real economy and the real world forward and to deliver on the promise of the Paris Agreement. It's been an honour to work closely with my dear, dear friend Gonzalo for the last nearly 2 years, and I look forward to working very closely with an African champion to accelerate action on mitigation, on resilience, and on the means of implementation. And I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Thank you, Nigel, for your words. This concludes the third and last session of this high-level event. I would like to thank all parties, observers, and non-party stakeholders for their participation. Let me also thank the UN Secretary-General, the Executive Secretary, all the non-party stakeholder speakers for joining us today in this global climate action high-level event, and of course, in special, our high-level champions. And let's keep on working together to continue the raising for a better world. Thank you so much.
Everything is connected on this planet, from the tiniest creatures producing the oxygen in the ocean to us breathing it here on land.
I'm seeing greater dialogue and connections and action between public sector, private sector, development partners, and various stakeholders.
Rapid collaboration means bringing the whole system to the room towards a true energy transition.
We need to galvanize private sector capital to invest in climate action at scale and at incredible speed.
All the science is clear about stopping deforestation. We need to halt it today, and we need to restore nature.
We must also acknowledge that keeping 1.5 alive requires us to keep adaptation and resilience as a top equal priority.
We've left the starting line, but we need to go much further, much faster.